Hey, it's Travel Gigolo. So, I recently posted on the community board, do you have any questions for me? And I got quite a few questions back from all of you out there, and I'd like to answer those questions today. Questions in hand. Okay, first up, Zach Choga. Zach has a couple of questions, and he says, question number one, how far in advance do you guys plan for your camping trips? That is an interesting question. It depends on how significant the trip is. So if we're doing a trip out of the country, like we've just recently done to Zimbabwe, for example, or to Botswana is another good example, Namibia, or if it's a long trip that's going to take a couple of weeks, so something that's going to happen over 3 weeks or something like that, then we start planning that about a year in advance. So it may sound like a lot, but if you want to get all the camping sites in all the right order on all the right days over an extended trip, then you typically have to book at least 6 months in advance, or else it gets difficult to get exactly the camping sites you want on exactly the days that you want to do that. Depends, of course, on where it is, and there are some places where you must book well in advance. So Botswana is a good example of that. The Kalahari Transfrontier Park is another good example of that. So can be a year in advance, but for basic weekends and stuff, then it's just it's a few weeks in advance, maybe a month and a half, and that's just around planning our stuff and getting free time and the right time to go and all that sort of thing. Question number two from Zach. How do you guys get to know about the various hidden beautiful gems you have camped at? For example, Matamba, love Matamba, Sumabula, nice spot as well, etc. Do you use travel agents? We don't use travel agents. My significant other is absolutely fantastic, phenomenal at finding great places to go and camp. And so a lot of it is just getting on the internet and searching for places to go to. Sometimes we just come across stuff, we come across articles, for example, online as well. But basically, we typically want to camp in a specific area, and then we start looking for campsites in that area, either online or sometimes on Google Maps, for example, but usually online. You could also use Tracks for Africa. There's quite a lot of information in Tracks for Africa, so that's a good source of information for camping sites. Question number three from Zach. Do you ever do group camps, or is it always just the two of you? It's almost always just the two of us. Sometimes we do camp in groups, and that's when we go camping with friends, for example, but generally it's just the two of us, and the reason for it is that our friends don't normally camp to the extent that we camp. Next, road trip with N Polobas. Is overlanding just a hobby for you? Then you share your experiences and very useful tips, thank you for that, with us, or do you generate income from it? We love your content, thanks so much. So not really, we don't really generate significant income from it. There are adverts on the YouTube episodes, but it's pretty much negligible, to be honest. A lot of, well, the majority, almost the entire cost, of course, is a personal cost. So we road trip because we love to do it. And the purpose of the channel is to share that information with people. And where it kind of started was that we were going camping and we were doing road trips, and there was no information or current information online. And so the idea was to then create a channel and share that information, so that if you want to go somewhere and you look it up online, then you see it. Also, if you are a follower of the channel and you see places we've been to, and you get some ideas of where you might want to go and camp, or just enjoy a road trip or a national park, or whatever the adventure is. This is a good question. I don't know what the answer is. What did we pack that we never used? I feel like the 2-cup roaster we packed and we almost never used it. A question from Time Out, Scenes and Sounds of the Outdoors. What gear or item do or did you always pack and end up never needing or using? That's a good question. So when we first started camping, our very first road trips, we packed most of the house, half of the kitchen, and then there's a lot of stuff that we didn't use. So along the way, we've kind of trimmed that down to essentials, and that of course is just with experience. Lately, there isn't much that we take with us that we never use. I would say sometimes I take an extra camping chair, and this chair in particular, and almost never use it. And the reason for that is that these directors chairs are rigid. So it's difficult to kind of get comfortable in it if you're on ground that's not entirely flat. So this is probably something, but it's a really great chair because it's got a table and all that sort of stuff. Our 2-cup roaster as well, which is nice for braaiing if you don't have a grid, but there's almost always a grid, and we always do take our small braai with us in any case. So that's kind of become like a superfluous thing. We always take canned food as well as a backup, and we've actually never had to use the backup, and that's in several years now of road trips and camping. So we still do take it, but to be honest, I wonder if it's necessary. However, having canned food can come in handy. So we are planning our trip to Botswana, and there are vet fences, and depending which direction you go, you can't take meat with you or other goods, the dairy and poultry and all that sort of stuff. So in that case, the canned goods might come in handy if we get that planning wrong. A question from Man Walker in a Park. I love that handle. How did you end up overlanding? Have you tried other types of travel, such as hiking or canoeing, and found overlanding to be the best fit for you? Good question. We kind of overland to places and then sometimes do things like hiking and canoeing. I've only significantly canoed on the Orange River, for example. That was a particular adventure that was set up. And then hiking, I'm not the type of person that will hike for days in the mountains with just a backpack. I love being outdoors, but that's just a little bit too much outdoors for me. So we typically overland because, you know, it's easy to get to places, it's comfortable to go and set up a tent in a camping spot and that sort of thing. I think I could do like a Fish River Canyon hike, for example, but still you'd have to overland to get to the Fish River Canyon, and that would be a specific adventure. So yeah, you know, we road trip because we want to go places, and it's generally cheaper and more convenient to road trip than to fly, for example. And you know, that's kind of how we started, was that it was a financial constraint. So road tripping and camping was the solution, and now it is the only solution. And in addition to that, the journey is as significant as the destination. So you see so much more when you overland and drive somewhere and spend time along the way and that sort of thing. So that's important too. Speaking of costs though, with the current cost of diesel and driving a Land Cruiser, which on a good day does 20 liters per 100 kilometers, it's actually maybe not so cheap to drive anymore. Eric Smith, what was the one least expected item that ended up being an absolute necessity on road trips? Good question. Our trusty little Weber braai. Surprisingly, there's a lot of places you go to where the braai grid's not great, or it's in a difficult position to braai because it's too high above the coals or the fire, or it's too big and spaces are too big and it's just not ideal. And sometimes it's in a difficult position and all that sort of stuff. So we end up using our braai more than, in fact, almost always. We almost always use our braai. So that's become a necessity. And you wouldn't think it. You would think that in most cases you go camping and there's going to be a braai stand there or a braai setup and that sort of thing. It usually is the case, but it's just so much more convenient to have your own little braai that you can put exactly where you want, and you can sit exactly where you want, and you can sit around your little braai if you want to and all that sort of stuff. So that is something that I did not expect I would call essential, but it has become an essential part of our setup. Another thing about having a small braai that has a lid on it is that you can use the lid. So it just gives you a few more options in respect of how you're going to braai and what you're going to braai. Another thing, of course, is safety. The nice thing about having a little braai that you can close is that when you finish braai and you're going to bed, you can just shut the braai and go to bed and have that feeling, peace of mind that you don't have to worry about sparks and coal and stuff and, you know, possibly causing a fire. And the second thing, Eric, is our little camping table, which is really nice, and it folds up into a very small package. But it's really great to have because you can have it next to you when you're braaiing and doing stuff. It's a nice place to put a surface to put stuff on. You can have it inside your tent and put your stuff on when you're charging things and so on that you don't want to be on the floor. You keep it outside your tent and put your shoes on top of it if you're worried about scorpions and stuff getting into your shoes if they're outside the tent. So that's also become an essential thing, which I would not necessarily have thought when we started camping that it is something that I would not like to go camping without. One more thing. We've got a gas stove, a little 2-plate gas stove. Now, when we started camping, we didn't have a 2-plate gas stove. We had a little gas canister with a single plate on top of it, and we almost never used it because it was, you can only put like one thing on it at a time. And we would never have thought of getting a 2-plate gas stove. We got one when we bought the Land Cruiser because it came with it from the people that had the Land Cruiser before. And it's been a really great addition to our camping setup. So I don't know if I call it essential, but it's certainly very useful, and I can't see us now going camping without it because it's really great for making breakfast in the morning when you're not going to want to start a fire and that sort of thing, and for making lunch, for example, when you just come back for lunch and you want to do some stuff, quickly have some lunch and go out again. So that's another thing that I would recommend, and that I think we didn't initially think was essential, but it's probably now become essential. But not sure about essential, but it's definitely part of our generic setup for whenever we go camping. Also, nice thing about gas is that if you just want to make a cup of tea or coffee, you just go and you switch it on and you make a cup of tea or coffee. So it's a really nice to have. Kato Nkoma, you ask, what mistakes did you make in your early years that you'd advise newbies to avoid? I think two very significant things. The first, and probably most important, is when we started road tripping, we were kind of in a rush, and we would camp at a spot in a night and then move on to the next place and try and see as many places as possible in the time that we had. And that's really not the way to do it. So we have now changed that quite drastically, and we try to camp a minimum of 2 nights wherever we camp, and that way we've at least got a full day to explore a place. Ideally 2 or 3 nights or more if it's possible, although it's sometimes difficult to do that if you want to see a lot of areas in a reasonable period of time. So that's number one. Number one is to slow down and break the journey up and take a bit of time to camp here and camp there for a couple of reasons. One is because you get to explore the place a lot better, and also you don't feel tired. You're not constantly getting up in the morning, packing the car, driving, setting up camp. You have a few hours to do something, then next morning you're getting up, you're packing the car, etc., etc. It's not the way to do it. So that's probably the most significant thing that I would advise. Number 2, a checklist. So we have a checklist of stuff that we need to pack in the car before we leave. Now, you think that's kind of obvious, but a very simple mistake to make, and not a good lesson to learn. So take it from me, put together a checklist of stuff that you definitely want to take with you when you camp, and that checklist will increase and decrease over time, and you'll eventually get it to exactly what's perfect for you. So we have a very nice checklist that my significant other has put together. She's the checklist master, and that works really well for making sure that we have everything that we want and need when we're camping. Also, you need a checklist for going out of the country. So stuff that you need for the border crossing, for example, so details for the vehicle or papers for the vehicle, insurance, all that sort of stuff. So it's important, especially if you're driving out of the country, and also of course if you're driving somewhere remote where you can't easily dash somewhere and buy some stuff that you forgot to take with you. Pumelelo. Where would be the best place to have a long stay for people relatively new to camping? What are your considerations? I think the best piece of advice I can give in that respect is a national park. So like the Kruger National Park, for example, for a couple of reasons. Number one is that you're typically in a campsite that is fenced, and so you feel safe. Number two, the main camps, not the satellite camps, usually have a store and a restaurant and stuff, so you get essentials if you forget something or you haven't thought of something, for example, and you have access to ice and you have access to fuel, and if you really want to, you can go and have a meal, for example, at one of the restaurants. So that kind of makes that introduction to camping a bit easier, less stressful because you have options, and often there's a small town nearby as well, so you can take a short drive if you really need to get something from outside of the park. So my first recommendation would be to go to a national park. The Kruger National Park is a really good example, and typically to go to the main camps at those parks. Otherwise, go for a camping weekend, for example, a short stay rather than a long stay. And in that case, there's a few camping sites that we've reviewed, and since we're based in Joburg, typically we want to go to places that are relatively close in Gauteng or close to Gauteng, for example. But yeah, I think those are the main considerations for me, is that you want to be somewhere where you're safe, you've got a fenced campsite, you've got access to basic shops and fuel and that sort of stuff, and also you're surrounded by other campers as well, so you can ask questions and get advice and that sort of stuff. People that are camping are almost always friendly, and it's generally a nice atmosphere to camp in, and people communicate and get to know each other and stuff like that there. So I would definitely recommend, as a first choice for a long stay, for somebody who's not used to camping, one of the national parks and the main campsites in those national parks. Dumisani Tebe, how do you fund your adventures? Actually, Dumisani, you've got a couple of questions here, so I'm going to go through them one by one. Question number one, how do you fund your adventures? Well, we self-fund our adventures. So we pay for everything, fuel, camping, the works. Obviously, we've accumulated gear over some time, so we don't spend a lot of money on gear these days, if anything. Our primary costs are fuel, and I suppose the cost of the campsites and food. Fuel is by far the biggest cost. Dumisani, question number two, any sponsorship deals? At this point, no sponsorship deals. We pretty much, like I say, fund everything that we do. So hopefully at some point in the future that will become something, but depends on how the channel grows, I suppose, over time. But again, we're doing this because we love doing it and we want to share the information. So that's really what it's about. Correction though, we did have a good relationship with Boston Breweries. We're in our infancy, or in the channel's infancy, and we did get some good refreshment out of that. Next question, Dumisani. What was the budget for the Zim tour? Did you go over or under your budget? Yeah, so fuel is pretty much the budget. Consider it's 5,000 kilometers and the vehicle does 20 liters per 100 Ks. That'll give you an idea of the budget, and most of the budget is fuel. So that's pretty much the majority of it, and of course there's a few costs in respect of camping and so on, but by far the major cost is the fuel. Did we go over or under budget? We were definitely over budget because we didn't realize how much fuel we were going to require, because some of those roads are quite difficult to navigate. So especially, for example, driving up to Chizarira and driving down to Patusatona and driving up again. So we did end up, in respect of our fuel budget, going a bit over, well, significantly over. And that's by far the majority of the cost of road tripping for us. Generally, we do stay within budget. However, with that trip, it was kind of an unusual trip because we had the COVID quarantine requirements. And so instead of doing a simple loop through the places we want to go to, we had to drive to Mabwe Bay in Kariba, or on Kariba, and then drive through going downstream and then kind of loop back to Hwange National Park. So that made it expensive because we had to do a lot more mileage. And of course, it was a 28-day trip. So that was a very long trip by our usual standards. And last question, Dumisani, how did we start? Well, we wanted to travel, we wanted to see places, and it's expensive to fly and to stay in a lodge and that sort of stuff. And so that's why we started camping and road tripping, and camping in particular. And I think what we didn't realize at the time was that there's so many benefits other than the cost reduction that comes with camping, in that when you road trip and drive, you see so much more and you have so much more opportunity to explore a lot of places along the way and along the way back and around a specific area and so on. So that's basically how we started. We started because we were broke and we wanted to travel and we wanted to see stuff, and yes, that was the answer. Road trip, camp. Also, when we started, We had the Nissan Lavina as our vehicle, which is a sedan. It's not an overlanding vehicle. It was also a lot cheaper fuel-wise back then to do it with that vehicle. And because it kind of became a passion and we needed a vehicle that could go to more places more easily or with more peace of mind, you know, then we've got the Land Cruiser now. But yes, that's how we started. Next up, Trevor Brewer. Trevor, you ask, what is you and your lovely wife's names? Also, what do you do for a living? So question number one, names. My significant other's name is Lara and my name is Abdul. So yes, Sanele, I know you were waiting for that. So now when you meet me at the shops, you can call me by my name. And Trevor, so you ask also, what do you do for a living? I am an environmental engineer, which is kind of a branch of chemical engineering. So basically, it's got to do with pollution and permitting for mines and manufacturing and stuff that produces pollution that needs to be controlled, that needs to be, or needs to fit within a regulatory framework. Then that is what I do. I'm an environmental engineer. Next up, Mongisi Mhlanga. Best places to visit on a tight budget. Almost always, the most significant cost in respect of our budget is fuel. So, best places to visit stuff that's close by. That's probably the first tip. Second tip, look for campsites that charge per campsite rather than per camper or per vehicle. And then take some friends with, because then it reduces the total cost. But yes, quite seriously, the more people are camping, the easier it is to share the costs, especially fuel. So if you're in Gauteng, you know, I could recommend a couple of places. River Run Resort is really nice. We really enjoy camping there. It's relatively close by. Camping at Dinokeng as well is nice because then you're in theoretically a Big Five park. I've never seen the whole Big Five there, but you know, that's relatively close by as well. And I think distance is the main thing. So you want to camp relatively close by. We camp quite a bit in Limpopo as well because it's warm and it's a nice tropical-ish place to be as well. But then it's a bit of a longer drive. It's about 300 kilometers sometimes from Johannesburg to get to where we're camping. So I think the main thing is you want to camp relatively close by. So River Run's great, Sumaula's great, Dinokeng is a great place to camp. I think you want to camp close by. Distances aside, and of course depending where you are living or starting from, national parks are also quite cost effective. So national parks are a good idea as well, though the camping is generally a bit more affordable there than in private places. And if you've got a wild card, and you should get a wild card if you're going to go to the national parks relatively often or be visiting national parks, because that also reduces your costs quite significantly. Last but not least, Brad Keat. I love this. This is my favorite question. Castle Light or Black Label? Sorry, Brad, neither. Castle Double Malt of late, I think, is kind of my favorite right now. I also like Corona. I know a lot of people don't like Corona, but I particularly like Corona. And then I like craft beer as well. And in particular, I like Weisses. So yeah, any of those. Castle Light, occasionally if I have to. And Black Label, I'll probably have Black Label before Castle Light. So thanks, this has been great. I loved your questions and I loved answering them as well. And of course, if you've got questions on any particular episode, put those in at the bottom in the comments and I will gladly answer those. Sometimes don't answer them straight away because doing stuff or camping out or not around or just working. Lobo Lobs. Hello, Lobo. That's my boy. Hello, Spuddy dogs. Hello, my boy. Hello, my dogs. You're a good boy. He's a good boy. Good dog. Okay, rock and roll. Keep those comments coming, man. It's fantastic to get those positive comments from you guys and that encouragement. I really enjoy that, and it's really great to get feedback from you all. So until the next episode, go everywhere, see everything, Have a great time.